Welcome back to another episode of the Two Dates and a Dash podcast. I'm your host, Matt Cubbler. On today's episode, I sit down with my buddy Russ Hittle once again. But this time, it's just basically two cops talking shop and sharing stories about the chaos that is law enforcement. So sit back and relax and enjoy this episode of the Two Dates and a Dash podcast. What is up, podcast land? Welcome to another episode of the Two Dates and a Dash podcast. I'm your host, Matt Cubbler. Before I get started with my man, Russ, master of Dark Horse, I want to first tell everybody where they can hear the podcast. Pretty much wherever you listen to podcasts, audio-wise, Apple, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever it is you listen to your audio podcast, you can find it there. All I ask is that you hit the automatic download and subscribe buttons. That helps me with my metrics, and I truly appreciate that. If you want to watch the episode, you go to my YouTube channel at Matt Cubbler, MattCubbler, and you can see the podcast there. Or you can go to my website, twodatesandadash.com. You can also find more about me and my book at mattcubbler.com, which the book I wrote in 2006, A Brother's Love and Memoir about my life growing up with my brother Andy, who sadly passed away in a car accident in 1989. My brother was autistic, more on the highly functioning side, but had a severe stuttering problem. And he was the greatest person I ever knew. And it's just our life through my eyes. And I'm very proud. It's the greatest thing I've ever done in my life. So if you want to get a copy of A Brother's Love and Memoir, please go to mattcubbler.com or Amazon or wherever else you may buy books. What else? I guess that's it. All right, without further ado, my man Russ Hittle, how are you?
I'm good, Matt. How are you?
I'm good, buddy. Listen, typically, you were on the show before, had a great episode with you talking about your career and being a cop and all the things you've accomplished and the things that you've been involved with. But this is going to be a little bit of a different episode. This is going to be, I look at this as two guys in a bar who had a rough shift, who are maybe have a couple glasses of some Irish whiskey and a chaser beer, and we're just
do that. Should we do that now?
Yeah. Hey, it's 5:00 somewhere. I think this episode, rather than finding out more about Russ, I think this is a really good opportunity for people to really see what it's like to be a cop, what it's like to do it for decades. And I'm coming up on 3 decades. You're 25 years or so, and
yep.
I'm just about done, and you still got a little bit more to go, and
just a little bit.
And I think it's a really good vantage point for people to understand some of the complexities of the job, not just the highlight reel stuff, but the stuff that maybe doesn't make the newspaper or the resume, but are just as important nonetheless. So the theme, I did a TEDx audition few years back and proudly made it to the top 30. They took top 25. I'd like to say that I lost out to the Indian from the Village People, which I did. He was one of the 25 that got selected, the guy that was the Indian from the Village People. So I always say he beat me, which, fuck it. I'm all right with that. But the theme of the TEDx talk was chaos. And the reason I didn't get selected is because my topic was so controversial for the intellectual crowd that they felt that I might start a riot. Right? It was during the period of time, it was right around the time of Ferguson and Black Lives Matter movement starting, and there was a lot of variables going on, and they thought that my talk was just a little bit too inciting, for lack of a better word. So I want to talk about chaos today. I want to talk about what it's like to live in a world where chaos is the norm, and how do people like us, and there's hundreds of thousands of us across the country, how are we expected daily to be perfect in the storm? And how does that actually look? Not in the theoretical world where unicorns, rainbows, and puffy dogs rule the day. In reality, and what does that look like? And how do we, as police officers and keepers of the chaos, how do we manage that daily? Does that make sense? Does it sound like a good topic we can nail down?
I think it's a fantastic topic, and I think in the process of this, it's probably going to hurt some people's feelings. Honestly,
and there's probably going to be a couple F-bombs in there, so I will put it out there first. Well, I do cuss on my show, but this may be a little bit more cussing than you're typically accustomed to, and I am by nature, and I would say on any given day I say fuck 5,000 times. Like it's like the or and or but to me. Like it flows contextually in just about every conversation I have during the day.
You'll find that a common theme with individuals that serve this country in the military.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess that'll pull right into our whole chaos deal.
Yeah, and we're both veterans, both Army veterans, and I think for me, now I'll lead first with what I believe is the biggest misconception in the world about law enforcement, especially in our country, but I think globally it's also a misconception, is that somehow we have this amazing superpower and this ungodly, like God-chosen warrior, Roman, like back in the day when they had, the gods, that we were chosen by Zeus or whoever to fill this role of a police officer. And when I tell people that what it takes to be a cop, like just the basic fundamentals of how can somebody become a cop? Literally, you have to be 18 in Pennsylvania, 18 years of age, can read, write, and spell. Sometimes you wonder with some people we work with, and go through a 5 or 6 month long police academy. Yeah. And do a 6 to 12 month on the job training program, right? Field officer training program. A field training officer, I'm sorry. And that is it. You're looking at 18 months. Doctors are 8 years, lawyers are 8 years. Like some of the ones that we look at and they're the most highly skilled is almost a decade of training and educating and learning and practicing. And in 18 months, you could be a 19-and-a-half-year-old fucktard who hasn't seen shit in this world. Conceivably, it doesn't happen often, but conceivably it could. And you would have to, on your first shift, you could be thrust into the most chaotic environment you could ever imagine. And it doesn't matter when you call 911 as a citizen, you don't give a fuck what our situation is. You just want your situation fixed. So you may get the 19-year-old or the 30-year veteran, but you don't know, but it doesn't matter. Your expectation is the same. And that's just asinine. That is what we are expected. We are expected to be the 30-year veteran who's seen everything and done everything and figured every backdoor way of solving a problem out over the course of 30 years. That person at 19 is supposed to already have that knowledge because of some ordained godly notion that we are chosen to be the protectors of the world and the problem solvers for everybody's fucked up life. That's chaos. That's being a cop.
Yeah, pretty much in a nutshell.
And when you're 19, you remember when you became, how were you? 20? You did quite a few years in the Army, right? 8 years or something.
Yeah, the first time I was ever presented a badge, I was 20 years old as an MP. That's the first time I ever held arrest authority.
But as a when you got out of the military, how old were you when you became a street cop?
Well, I was still in the reserves when I got hired. When I got hired as a police officer, minus my time as a deputy sheriff, which was not long. When I got hired as a police officer in Tredyffrin, I was 24 years old. Okay.
So I want everybody to stop and think about your life, whatever you do. I don't give a shit if you're a banker, whatever you do. At 24 years old, who were you? And what was your capability of living life independently without any assistance from anyone else? What was your life as far as making decisions, as far as problem solving? And just think about a 24-year-old anywhere, doing anything, and then give them the responsibility that a police officer has, because it is a gigantic responsibility. I don't think people understand how that weighs on us. That's huge.
I mean, let's call a spade a spade. You're giving not only the ability, but the authority for someone to take a life.
And stop you from living yours and your freedoms.
Yes, take your freedom away. Take your freedom away. And that weight in and of itself on a police officer, if they really sit and think about it. Now, I also think a problem with today's law enforcement officers, these new guys and gals, they don't think of it like that. They don't have that concept. We understood, years before when we became members of the military, and you take that oath. Hey, listen, you may be called and you may have to go someplace in a foreign land like you did. I was fortunate enough, unfortunate, depending on how you look at it, fortunate enough that I never had to serve overseas. I was deployed in our own country to handle some business, but we had that understanding, and that training and a mindset, a combat fighting mindset. But a lot of you don't get that in college in a law enforcement theory. That is so foreign to you. You don't get that, and I can say that because I'm not college educated.
Neither.
When I hit the street, I had the mentality of an MP and a soldier. I knew what I had to do and accomplish it in a professional manner. And I guess that's going to go into the whole aspects of chaos. I like to talk about it when, we start talking about a mindset, because that's what you need.
I mean,
you've got the plan.
You touched on something a little bit, and then we'll go here, and then we'll I think we can almost like foreshadow and then reverse back, kind of like in a
hell yeah
TV show. But I've talked about this publicly, and I've been a proponent of law enforcement change for years, mostly in a reverse way. There are people that think we should be doing more of certain things, and I think that that's actually taking our job and essentially turning it into artificial intelligence rather than it being what it should be. Police, I'll give you an example. Cities, boroughs used to have, and even townships in Pennsylvania have, and still do have, some sort of a mileage. You got to live within so close to your jurisdiction for the most part. And, Norristown used to have a home rule. You had to live there if you wanted to work there. Same thing with Pottstown, city of Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, all the major cities. And they did that for a reason. And, people look at it as, oh my God, I don't want to live in the city. But at the time, the logic was, if you are living in the environment where you work, they're going to have more of a vested interest in keeping it at a certain level of control and lack of chaos. and I believe firmly that people that are from the areas of which they are asked to serve are more than likely. There are times when maybe there's some nepotism involved and you cut some breaks with people that you knew and you grew up with. But for the most part, you're aware of and more in tune to the needs of that area. That's why they had foot beats, and cops would get to know the business owners, get to know the residents, and get to know the kids. That's why law enforcement worked the way that it worked back in the day, because police were trusted. They got to know the people in their community. They got to understand the needs and concerns of the people that they're protecting. And shortly after 9/11, law enforcement jumped the shark. And there became this thing called accreditation. And accreditation became basically big government controlling functions of smaller entities that don't necessarily have to function like big government. So when they started doing this accrediting, it became this policy-driven, this process-driven. And on some levels, I agree with it, but on many levels, I disagree, because it takes away the human element to law enforcement. It turns it into a paper trail creating process, and cops became disinterested in many of the things that would maybe create paperwork, because paperwork is then assigned, it was given a process, whatever it is, the function they were doing was assigned as a process, and then paperwork was required every time you performed that function. We overcomplicated the process of being a cop. And with that came this overwhelming need to hire college educated people. And that's not saying it, I'm not saying education's bad. I'm saying that if the basis for which you're hiring is, do you have a college education, that becomes the flawed part of the process. Because guys like us, me and you, who had, since we were little, I mean, I was 6 when I wanted to be a cop. I knew that my entire life I was going to be a cop. I also knew I wanted to serve my country. I did both of those things, and I believe those experiences have led me to my career of success. I know plenty of guys that have been hired in the last 20 years who went to college, were unsure what they wanted to be with their life, could have chosen accounting, business, marketing, may have actually went for that. And then when they got out and found out it was hard to get a job in those areas, or the prospects of long-term growth within those jobs wasn't what they thought, and they saw, wow, police are hiring and they pay decent starting money and they got a pension and good health benefits. Maybe I'll try that. And they do it. And they clearly are smart enough to pass the tests, and they get hired. And the next thing you know, you have the robot version of accreditation that can go out and be task driven.
Oh my gosh. I got one thing to say to that. You know what that reminds me of?
What?
That reminds me of the people that I went to basic training with that actually told me they joined the service to get free college.
Yeah, exactly.
And I remember during FTX, because I went to basic training in Fort Knox, Kentucky, and it was a rough spot. I mean, everybody's like, oh, my basic training was hard. Fort Knox and Fort Benning were the only 2 places left where drill sergeants actually touched you back in 93. I mean, touched, you know what I'm saying? And I remember drill sergeants coming up during FTX and going, and it was a scenario they had cooked up just to see the reaction of the soldiers. And they told us, we're going to Bosnia-Herzegovina, which wasn't too far off.
Yep, that was right around that time.
We are speeding you through FTX. You will be put in a infantry unit and you're going to Bosnia. And there were literally people in our company that like started to cry. And drill sergeant's like, what is wrong with you? And I'm just sitting there with a stoic look on my face. And I remember like it was yesterday. It was, God, I wish I could remember his name. He wasn't one of my drills. He was from another platoon. And he looked at me, he goes, what do you say about that? I was like, with all due respect, drill sergeant, I joined this service to fight for my country. So let's go. And he was like, and that's the proper answer. And these guys are like, I joined for college. Oh, the drill sergeants want to kill him. But that's the mentality that I think of. I wanted to be an accountant, but it looks nice over here. This is a vocation. This is not a job. This takes a special type of person to do this particular vocation. I mean, I remember back with, well, probably in the same genre when you went through the police academy, there were scientific studies done, psychological studies that put us closely to men of the cloth.
Yeah.
It takes that amount of empathy and compassion, but then on top of that, you have to be a warrior. You can't push papers in a cubicle for your entire life and then say one day you want to put on a badge and a gun, take people's liberty away if it has to be, or in worst case scenario, take a life, or in the best, save a life. Those are aspects of life that the majority of people in society don't have to deal with. They don't. And if they do, it may be one time in their career. Police officers are exposed to in their career, over 800 to 900 critical incidents in a career. 900.
That's 900 chaotic environments minimum.
Yes.
That,
Yes.
and when he says critical incidents are anything that could psychologically just destroy a human, right? Those are things that when they are done, the lasting effect is oftentimes not seen because we do a very good job of compartmentalizing things. But that's a debt that keeps growing in your soul. And when you have 800 to 1,000 critical incidents, that's a weight that's in your heart and in your soul and in your brain that you can't cash out. You can't let them. They're not going to go away. They're there forever. And I think, I think the point that I love that you just mentioned is there is that comparison to the people that are in clergy, because the expectation of the citizen is the same. When somebody goes to their pastor or their priest, they need answers. They need their problem solved, whether it's through prayer, whether it's through counseling, whether it's through intervention. That's what they're looking for. And that when somebody calls 911, that's what they're getting from a cop. And when people sit back and judge us for making mistakes, which we are human, it's that. And 2020 was kind of like it put everything on full display, right? That the mindset of America, at least, and the how quickly the world turned on law enforcement, and how little discernment and critical thinking went into that process, and how gaslighting and the media control over information narrative created this belief that we belong to a profession of trained killers. And I think it goes back to your point. We live in a world where the expectation is greater than the reality, whether it's social media, getting likes on a post or TikTok video or whatever the case. I call it the dumbification of America. And
absolutely.
And we've created this low level bar of expectation of ourselves, but a high unattainable threshold bar of expectation for the people that we believe we pay for. And that to me has taken law enforcement and flipped it on its head. It was bad enough when it flipped on its own head, when it created this accreditation and this intellectual based hiring process versus the psychological profile that you mentioned early on that shows there's a certain profile for, and that's my background, it's your background, two different approaches, but same background of profiling. There is a profile for a law enforcement officer. There is without a doubt a tried and true perfect profile for a law enforcement officer. And they decided that was no longer good enough because they couldn't accreditate that, right? That's a guy that works in the gray.
Yeah, you know where I would equate it to? I would equate it to the warrior monks of the Knights Templar.
Yep.
Here are men of God, and we discussed this in the first episode that my company and of course my belief system. I'm not pushing religion down anybody's throat, but those men, if you look back into antiquity, those men they had a purpose. Their purpose was driven by their faith in God, and they escorted peasants to visit the Holy Land and took care of them. Now, there's a lot of history with that. But just think of that. Men who prayed, but could bring death upon someone who threatened them or threatened the lives of someone that they protected. I mean, I'm sure through the course of this video being on YouTube, A lot of my residents will see this, and by no means anything that I'm saying today, which I'm not ashamed of, it does not represent my police department. But, you know, after 22 years of working in that jurisdiction, I have been, in my opinion, I have brought the love of God to so many people, even individuals that I've arrested. And I think that's lacking. I really do. I think it's lacking. There has to be a balance between handling the job, going out, enforcing the law, but then on top of that, compassion. And guess what? The chaos of the job removes that. And it's removed, in my opinion, it's removed by the enemy. It's something that the enemy wants to remove from us. And by the grace of God and marrying a woman of God, I have been able to hold on to that. Sometimes just by the tip of my fingernails, but I have hung onto it through the course of my career. And that's probably why, and speaking bluntly to the people out there in podcast land, I am one of the individuals that have been exposed to some of the worst things in this job and have not started my gun. You know, you hear about, you're police officer suicide. Let's be honest. You know, if you've never seen somebody that decided to do that, you want to talk about a trauma, an absolute trauma. Think about what was going through that subject's mind before they did that. I weep and mourn for my brothers and sisters that have taken that route. I have talked more brothers and sisters off the ledge because I've been there. I understand where that goes. I haven't gone to that aspect of it, but I know how that can creep in there. And you know, the normal public, the normal citizen has not a concept. And hopefully through this, we can bring a little something to them.
And I think the goal of what we do is to keep them from, and I tell my mom this, and God rest her soul, she's the greatest woman on the planet, but she's been sheltered her whole life. And I want her to be sheltered. You know what I'm saying? Like there's certain things people shouldn't see.
Right.
There's certain things people shouldn't experience. But I don't think it should be hidden that it exists.
No.
And I think, and I know you are to many people as I am as well, I'm the provider of peace and comfort in many, many circles. And I try to keep myself as honest about everything that I talk about, whether it's politics, whether it's conspiracy theory shit, whether it's law enforcement, whether it's my faith, whether it's my family. I try to keep it all from a perspective of critical thinking, logic, and weighing all possibilities before I render an opinion on it. And I think what I hope this podcast produces is just enough of a glimpse into the world of law enforcement without forcing people to absorb what we have, who are incapable of managing that. And that's not a slight on anybody. It's just there are certain people that can handle shit. And that's just the reality of it. Like we talked a little bit on the phone because this is an abnormal format for my podcast. And we talked what is chaos a little bit on the phone the other day. And I'll give you an example. I have two children. The most important things in my life are my daughter, Rebecca, who's going to be 24 in a couple weeks, actually in about a month, and my son, who's 19, Andrew. And I would die for them, but I did not want to see them come out of my wife. I had zero desire to see my child or anything exit my wife's womb, right? I didn't want that to happen. I didn't need to be there. I'm throw a blanket over the knees. I will hold a hand. I will rub a back. I will let her squeeze and cuss at me and whatever she needs to do while she's pushing that thing out. I didn't need to witness it. right? I'm not a video camera all looking down the tunnel waiting for it to come out, right? That's not
No.
me. So with that being said, we as cops, typically when you get a maternity call, and if you live in my jurisdiction is small, it's 1.6 square miles. We can be anywhere in 2 minutes. Ambulance is usually a couple minutes behind, but not long. You get a woman in labor call, usually you got time, right? You're not getting there and delivering a baby. The odds are so slim that it's not in your mental Rolodex of things that when you hear it, you're like, ambulance got this. I'm just going to be there holding a flashlight, carrying the oxygen bag, maybe their gear bag, and making sure everybody gets out in the ambulance safely. That's it.
Right.
Unfortunately, in December 6, 2012, at 6 a.m, I had to respond to a maternity call in the parking lot of a TD Bank. And I get there, and I'm just setting this up because you got to imagine the person that just wants to hold the hand and rub the back, what I was presented with. So I pull up and it's cold and it's just daylight starting to happen. And I see the passenger side door open and an older woman standing in the doorway between the seat and the door. And I walk up and I'm Mr. Hey, how's it going? Heard we're having a baby. And the older woman looks at me like with this panic on her face. I'm like, oh shit. And she goes, yes, we are. And I walk up, I say, oh, and I walk up and I see a woman with her right leg in the door jamb between the door and the post of the car and the other one up on the dash. And I'm like, oh, fuck, we're having a baby right now. And I look in the back seat and there's 2 toddlers in the back seat in car seats. And I'm like, fuck. So I said, ma'am, do not do anything. Don't push. Don't do a damn thing. I said, I'm going to get your kids out of this car so they can know that you're safe. I said, so I put them in the back of my car. I said, I'm going to take care of your mom. And I went back up and she's still up in the legs posted up position. And I start to see the head of the baby coming out. I'm like, oh, no. And I can hear the siren in the background. Like, and I said, whoa, stop. You hear that? Those are the people that actually know what they're doing. I said, this is not the face of the guy you want delivering your baby. Trust me when I tell you this. She goes, you're all I've got. And she's pushing and the head comes out. And I'm like, fuck. So I slide my hands under her, one hand under her ass and one hand under the baby's head. And I'm like, man, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm literally just holding a baby. I don't know what I'm doing. I need you to stop pushing. She goes, I'm not stopping. And she just keeps pushing, keeps pushing. Ambulance shows up and they get out like, hey, what's going on? I'm like, get baby delivering shit because I'm in the middle of doing it. I don't know what So I got it to the point where it was like at the hips. The baby's hips were
wow.
And I'm just holding. I said, guys, somebody please relieve me, right? So funny story is I didn't know what she looked like. All I knew was her name, but I didn't know anything about her. Fast forward 2 years, and I'm at lunch, a local pizza shop. It's Mother's Day. And this Asian woman walks in with a 2-year-old, looks at me and goes, Officer Cubbler? I said, yes, ma'am. And she looks at me and she like leans in with the kid. I went, excuse me? She goes, I'm Jenny. This is Isaac. You delivered him? I went, oh shit, you're Chinese. I had no idea she was Chinese. Like I had no clue. I was just focused on her vagina and this baby, right? Like that's all I was trying to figure out is what am I going to do to not drop it? Like, is it going to live? Am I going to crush this thing as I'm holding it? Like, what do you do with your hands? Like, I didn't know what to do. And that chaos, the only thing I knew how to do, and I don't know if my humor trying to make her understand that I'm scared shitless just like she is, but I'm going to be there no matter what. And I'm going to try my very best. But if you could just please hold off until the experts come up, that would be great. But that chaos is real. And that's not anything I was prepared for. I didn't get any specialized training in delivering a baby. They teach you first aid. They teach you how to help people who've been, with a broken leg or to stabilize a neck in a car. And like, I'm not trained in that. But in that moment, I was told that I need to be an expert at that. I could have done a million things wrong.
Yeah.
But I didn't. And I had no fucking idea what I was doing. And those are the moments that I can tell you 1,000 of those where I didn't have any life experience, any training or whatever that would lead me to be qualified to handle whatever it was that was put in front of me. But that's what being a cop is.
Yeah.
Being a cop is improvise, adapt, and overcome. Figure it the fuck out. That's what the job is. And ultimately, being a cop is you are expecting me to unfuck your problem in 5 minutes. What did you ever have one of those off the wall crazy, not in the shooting world, but in any like
No.
the one job that you were like, fuck, I was not prepared for that.
I did, and unfortunately, mine wasn't a happy ending. The majority of the chaos that I've seen in this career was those that scarred me, and you know, putting the shootings aside, right? So two times I was shot at. Prior to that, a car accident where I've gotten flown down to Hospital University of Penn with a mild traumatic brain injury. I think the one that affected me the most is kind of on your like it's kind of like yours, except mine was on the other side. And I was called to an unresponsive 6-week-old baby. Wasn't my sector. I still went balls to the wall to get there. It was all the way out, like right on the border of my jurisdiction in Upper Merion. I mean, literally on the border. Across the street is Upper Merion. And I get there. I can't get my trunk open. For some reason, I was driving a Dodge Charger, and if something with the transmission wouldn't allow the trunk to open, got there with this unresponsive child, and the mother is outside screaming for me to help. And I'm trying to get my trunk open, and I can't. So I'm literally, look, gun belt, vest, Russ Hittle's coming. It's going to be whatever I have to do is going to be with these hands. And I'm the only guy. Like, there's no one else. And I ran up the steps, and I was greeted in a master bedroom with this little 6-week-old little boy. No pulse, not breathing. And I started CPR on this child, unprotected. Got his pulse back a couple times and then lost it. And I'm not ashamed to say it. I said it out loud. Like, the lady who was there with me, who was not the child's mother, she was like literally comatose downstairs. The lady who was with me while I was doing CPR, if she was here right now, she'd tell you, I literally was praying out loud. I was like, Lord Jesus, please don't take this child like this. And I worked on that kid for 10 minutes by myself. And the ambulance finally came. And then they wanted to take that child from me. I was like, no. And I continued to do rescue breathing and compressions on this kid until I got him in the bus. That's ambulance for those that aren't cops. And they took him away. And he passed. The worst part about that was, through the investigation, that I was stuck at the house to do. I wasn't even able to leave. They wouldn't let me leave. They were like, you need to do this investigation. Of course, I've worked narcotics for the majority of my career. So what do you can imagine what I found when I start walking around and there's nothing in the trash cans in this house? And it wasn't homeowners that were in the house. It was a daughter of the homeowner and then all these other people from different places. So then I went to the trash cans outside and I found a plethora of drugs: cocaine, heroin, crack, uh, liquid codeine. And I was stuck there. And to make matters worse, in the course of the investigation, I get a phone call from the Montgomery County coroner, and the child tested positive for HIV and hepatitis. He had blood all around his mouth. I was doing unprotected CPR. So you can understand what I had to go through after that. 6 to 9 months of blood tests, taking medications, not being able to be with my wife, and the psychological scars. But I had already learned earlier in my career, I can't do this by myself. And I told my chief right off the bat, I said, I need to go see my doc right now. And I had a doctor already I was talking to because of all the stuff that I had been through before. And that's exactly what I did. My chief of police pulled me aside that day when that happened, when I got called and told that this young child was positive. He looked at me and he says, Russ, I know cops that have been through a quarter in their career what you've been through, and they've killed themselves. And I was like, I'm not a quitter. That's not who my father raised me to be. I'm going to keep going. But it still leaves a mark and a scar. And that is something that the citizenry that we protect, they need to understand. They need to understand that.
It's so, first of all, thank you for sharing that. I can tell how emotional it made you, and rightfully so. You know, when you think about death, and I mean, I could list thousands of different times that I've been around death, personal and professional. And, you know, I think death is part of life, but death shouldn't be all encompassing in your life. Experiencing the people's last moments, not just going to a dead body call where, you know, somebody died in their sleep or whatever, but actually being there when someone dies is exhausting emotionally and physically. And, you know, I've probably given CPR 50 times in the last 30 years. I had a couple saves, but they're few and far between. And I've never had a baby in that situation like you did. I've had a drowning of a toddler where I had to do CPR, but he had been in the water for too long. Yeah, those things are real, and they do harden you a little bit. And I think more so as a defense mechanism, right? You can't allow in the moment the traumas of your past to impede your ability to do your job. And I think that's one of the hardest things cops have to do, is to compartmentalize those traumas. And, you know, you talked about suicides. I've had 3 people that I know on the job in the last couple of years that have killed themselves. For whatever reason, you know, the toll that this job takes on you collectively as a profession, but also at home, you don't know how that's impeding your ability to have relationships with those that you love. And I think it's a burden that we carry. I don't think the reward at the end is even remotely compatible to the risk and trauma that is accrued over time. There's a reason why most cops die shortly after retiring from massive heart attacks, strokes, anything that's nervous system or heart related, because there's just this compression that is maintained over decades. And when that compression is released, I think the body doesn't know how to handle that as just a biomechanical function. And I just think that it's important for the general populace to understand it's not just a bunch of guys that are totalitarian, authoritarian Nazis wearing uniforms fucking with people. That's not our job. I've told people this, and I still to this day hold this to be true. I've only had maybe 2 or 3 personal arrests where they meant something to me, where I was like, yeah, that motherfucker was a piece of shit. And he did the X, Y, and Z, and I am so fucking happy he's arrested. The rest of it's just business. For me, it's business. And I tell people when I arrest, listen, I don't know you. You don't know me. I don't have a problem with you personally. This is business. We are doing you're on one side of this transaction. I'm on the other. And you just need to understand this is the way it works. Next time you might get away with it. I don't know. But at the end, today is the day when my side won, and we got to go through this process, and this is how it looks. I'm going to treat you with respect that you deserve. And I'm going to give you all the rights and privileges that are required by law. And I think that's where I think some people think it's personal with us. Like we are giddy every time we make an arrest. I mean, let's just be honest. I think, and you're in a little larger department, but for the most part, making an arrest is a time-consuming fucking thing. It's not like it is on TV where you cuff them, drop them off, and give them to the booking officer, and you're back out on the street to cuff and stuff again. That might happen in big cities. And the reality is, and that's something I'll point out too, police work is different depending on where you're at. We've had guys come from the city, want to come work out where I'm at. And when they see how much fucking work they got to do, they're like, yeah, I'm going to go back to the city.
Yep.
Because it's so compartmentalized in the city. Yep. It's not like out where we're at, where you are the be all end all.
Yeah. They don't write arrest warrants. They don't write affidavits of probable cause. Ask them to write a search warrant.
Right.
They're like oblivious. Like they have no clue. And it's because everything was taken from them. They're supposed to grab the bad guy, bring him in, and be done. They write like 4 sentences, I think.
On a card.
We hired a bunch of we hired a bunch of cops from Philly. Granted, we got some really good ones from Philly, but those guys were like further involved in investigations. But some of the street guys, they're like, I never did this. Some of them never did a traffic stop because they were walking a beat. Like, that's not police work that I understand. I don't understand that. But yeah, it's a different animal.
And I think but there's so many like the media, television, movies, music have all skewed reality in not in a positive way of law enforcement. There is very little, unless you are related to or know someone personally that's doing this job. Most people have no fucking idea what we do. No clue. And they don't appreciate it's not a one-off. When you experience something negative, it doesn't just happen and then you deal with it and you put it away or it goes away. It is a brick that is the base. The first one's the base, and then the next brick goes on top of it, and the next brick goes on top of it, and the next brick goes on top of it, and it's built up inside of you. Whether it's taking someone's life, whether it's being in a hand-to-hand combat situation and being all by yourself, and someone's trying to kill you and take your weapon, and you're holding on for dear life, hoping that you can subdue this person or that the cavalry comes and helps. Like those moments, even though you survived it and you made it through, that's a brick. And those bricks bear weight inside of you, and they take spaces that may have otherwise been housing good thoughts and good memories and good feelings.
Yeah, spaces that should be with your loved ones, because that's what the toll in the end. Yeah, you know what? cortisol builds up in our systems and affects our hearts as cops. That's why there's a whole heart and lung act. And that's why we pass away so young. But think about the toll on the families.
Mm-hmm.
You know, my wife's gotten a call for a shooting twice in her career, like my career, I should say. She got rushed to a hospital that I was flown to in a police car, lights and sirens. Like maybe 2 years into the job. When they say, like, you see these like little memes with police wives and they're like, I don't know if they're coming home tonight. That's reality. That's absolute reality. And the vast majority of the public, they can't grasp that concept. And what about the kids? You know, I know my kids have been subject to, you know, outbursts. Nothing violent, but like just anger issues and being snippy and not being home and missing like milestones in their lives that they're like, my dad couldn't be here today. And they're like, oh, why? Because he's a cop and he has to go to work. You know, birthdays, Christmas. When I hear people talk about the fact that, oh, I got to work on Christmas, like I literally don't get Christmas off. I was lucky this year. I had Christmas off. Like, but I've gone so far in my career now that my kids are bigger. I've taken shifts for cops with young kids because I wish somebody did that for me when I was a young cop. There was one sergeant that did that for me one year when all 4 of my kids were young. And he was like, my kids are grown. I'll take your shift. Never asked for anything back. I just took a day. So now I'm doing that. This year, I wanted to spend time with my family. But the normal public has no concept of the chaos that exists in our lives, and not just during traumatic incidents. Talk about the chaos that happens as the aftermath. Chaos that we, as cops, when we're not taught by guys like you and me, the chaos that they go through in their mind every day. The chaos after shift. You know, I'm a living representation of what it's like. And finally, I was able to man up and say, I can't do this by myself anymore. Like it weighs on you. People have no idea what it's like to wake up at 2:00 in the morning on your day off and sit downstairs in your trophy room, just staring off blankly. Like, why am I awake? I should be asleep. And then you have racing thoughts about things that you've done as a cop. And those things just play and play and play and play.
I think chaos is such a universal term, and chaos, our world is chaos. It's not just one individual moment is chaos. The entire job is chaos because you're going from 0 to 100 at the sound of a dispatcher calling your number. So
and it could happen multiple times in one day.
And that's what people don't get. It's not just the moments. It's the deceleration acceleration component during any shift multiple times throughout the year over the course of a career that causes that level of trauma to build up inside of you.
Listen, hypervigilance can be a blessing. And in other aspects, hypervigilance can be an absolute curse.
Yeah.
It can lead to heart issues. It does lead to heart issues. Case in point, hi. Um, and then it can also lead to issues with the simple fact that you don't want to associate with anyone, or you just want to associate with cops because you want to have that sense of, yo, you know what? You understand. Bill Maruschek, who was an Upper Marion cop, who is still, I believe, sitting on the bench as a district magistrate in Upper Marion. I remember him telling me when I was in the police academy that I should not surround myself with friends that are cops. That's what he said. And he said because you become jaded because all you ever talk about is cop stuff. And sure, I've got friends that are cops. Like Shannon and I had this conversation. I've got contacts throughout the country. I could lay my head in any state of the union. But my inner circle, in my inner circle, there's literally no cops.
Same.
-1. And that's my business partner. But in my inner circle, there is no one. And lots of times, hey, listen, wake up, America. Lots of times we don't even have an inner circle because there's stuff like that we see. We can't talk about that stuff. Like you can't discuss like people's issues. You go to someone's house, maybe somebody you know, and they're involved in something, I don't know, an affair, and it causes a domestic or whatever. You can't go out and talk about that stuff. You can't say, hey, listen, man, I want to vent to you. You just can't.
I think a lot of it has to do with trust. Like I have a very low trust component to my personality. I trust people enough to keep them at a space where I'm comfortable. And depending on where they fall in the hierarchy of my life, that spot's different for different people. But I've learned this early on, and when I was in the military, I had a mentor of mine tell me that you're going to end up with 5 people in your life that you will be able to count on. And those 5 will be brought in at different periods of time. That 5 may change, but at any given time in your life, there may be 5 people that you can trust with your life. And he goes, and that's if you're lucky. So it's not like, we grew up and we have our friends growing up, and if you go to the military, you go to college, whatever, and you have your friends there, and you think you're gonna be friends forever, and then 30 years goes by, and you may see them on Facebook, shoot them a hi, but you're not really friends anymore. It's not like anything happened. It's just that life happens. But for me, there's only certain people that make it into my 5. And the rest are just tangentially part of my life because it's safer there for me, knowing the world that I live in and knowing the things that I have to do on a daily basis. It's safer for everybody to not be in my inner circle. That inner circle are people that are vetted and understand exactly what it's like to be me and what my expectations are of them. And we all agree to it. There's no stepping in and out. Once you're in, you're in. It's like blood oath almost, right? So I know that if I call and say I need a 6-foot deep hole, 6 foot long, and bring a tarp and some line, a shovel, you're not going to ask why, right? I always say if you can ask them to bury a body, they're in your 5.
Mm-hmm.
And that's important for guys like us who don't necessarily associate with other cops on a daily basis. I don't wear the blue lives matter stuff. I'm just a regular guy who just happens to do a job that is important. Yeah. And, early on, I was the FOP. I did all that stuff. But the older I got, the more I realized that I do that up 12 hours a day. I don't need to do it when I'm off. And I think that's helped with my mental acuity, my ability to rationalize what's going on politically in my department or socially or all the things that when you get a group of men together for the most part, the things that are going to happen. I can be a little bit more understanding of all sides when I'm not necessarily best friends with any of them. We're coworkers. And I'll give you a story. So my boss, who I've been friends with, and we were friends off duty before I started working for him. And when I got hired, I said, I think we need to make sure that we keep this professional. Yeah, I like you. I want to, like, if you weren't my boss, we'd be hanging out. But the fact is you are. And I know for a fact, I'm going to fuck up. And when I fuck up, I'm going to own it, and you're going to have to lay into me. And I don't want it to be weird. I want it to be very surgical, how this relationship works. We can get along great at work, but when I fuck up, I need you to do your job and to do what's right for the department. And I'll never not admit when I fuck up. That's just, I'm a grown ass man. I can admit when I fuck up. And
I'm with you on that one.
And recently I fucked up, and recently within the last 2 years, did some stuff social media wise that put a lot of pressure on him to make some decisions that I didn't intend for to happen. I voiced some opinions that were mine, and I still believe them to this day, but I got attacked for it, and some political heat came down, and he had to make a decision. And I told him, I said, listen, after he's done yelling at me, and I just had to break the ice because that's what I do. He's laying into me, and I said, listen, this is exactly why I told you when you hired me, we can't be friends off duty, because I needed you to be able to do this. Right. And I knew this was going to happen. I know me. Like, and I can only go without, when I say fuck up, it's more rocking the boat. In my world, I like rocking
that time.
Yeah. So
I remember that time. And I personally think it was just.
Yeah.
But we don't control the powers that be.
And I think, I need people to understand that we're fucking human. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, it's the only profession, where the expectation is whatever the caller, the person with the problem, the citizen who needs the police, whatever their expectation is the only expectation that matters to the world. Like when somebody calls 911, whatever it is they need solved, if it's not solved to their expectation, we suck and we're the worst. Yep. And that can be exponentially quantified throughout the country. Every minute of the day, a cop is not meeting the expectation of some citizen at no fault of the police's at all. And there is an amount, and I say this too, and I'll use this example. Recently, there was a Minneapolis female sergeant who was convicted of manslaughter. Is going to be doing 10 years in prison. Mm-hmm. She was, and if you, and I'm 99% sure on this, after the George Floyd, Minneapolis pretty much defunded their police department. They dismantled it. Hundreds of officers either resigned or were fired. And people who were in certain roles in law enforcement were cast back into roles that they were not necessarily accustomed doing because they were not required to as part of their job for a long period of time. When you are on a traffic stop or a domestic or any call where you're wearing a uniform and you're showing up in a police car to someone's 911 call, you have to have a loaded toolbox. You have to have the understanding of all the different ways this could go sideways, and within milliseconds determine which tool is the right tool to handle whatever the problem is. If you watch that video of what happened with her on that car stop, everything up until the point where she shot the subject with her firearm was a typical arrest of a subject involved in some sort of wrongdoing, that they were in a vehicle when it happened, whether it's the person has a warrant, when you walk up to get their license, find out they're wanted, whatever the case might be. That resisting component that happened, that trying to get handcuffs on, that happens thousands of times a day all across this country. I don't carry a taser. I don't carry a taser because I know we're only going to train on it once a year. And I know that it is a tool that, in my experience, is fallible.
Mm-hmm.
And I take that off of my toolbox list because I know that my other tools that I have that are not lethal are 10 times more effective than that potentially used tool of a taser.
Mm-hmm.
But if you carry a taser and you carry a firearm, you have two tools that are similar in construct, are similar in feel. And how you train with your firearm should be, if not more frequently, how you train with that taser. And if you don't know where that taser is in relationship to how you carry your equipment, in the heat of the moment, when you have not done so, you have not been in that, oh shit, zero to Corky for years because you were in a different role where you weren't exposed to that. But because of situations and decisions that were not of her making, she was forced back into a uniform position. She was forced to go from zero to Corky without any tools in her toolbox that she was confident in deploying. And she picked the wrong tool, thinking it was a different tool, and made a mistake. And she's now the cover girl
Mm-hmm.
for what the public wants to do when cops make a mistake.
See, in that, and I'm sure I'll catch some flack from this because I'm posting this on the Dark Horse page when everything's done, and I'm actually going to post this on 720 Interdiction. And my take from that whole thing, that whole situation, and I feel for the family. You know, people are like, well, he shouldn't have resisted. Listen, I've had hundreds, if not thousands, of people resist being taken into custody. Some really bad folks. And all those times, and the times that I've deployed my taser, I've never mistaken my Glock. At one point, a Glock 22, and now, a Glock 35. At no point have I ever mistaken my Glock for a taser. And we can say that particular officer was taken from her role at her police department. And what I use this particular situation, what I like to reference to, is a lack of training. I understand that you may be an admin. I understand that you may be stuck in a cubicle all day. You are a cop, you carry a badge, you must train. If your department fails to train, guess what? They're going to pay for it too. Because that 1983 case, whatever, that criminal case comes down, there's a good chance they're going to get popped with negligence too because they failed to train you. You cannot mistake the size or the weight of a taser. I don't care what kind of ultralight handgun you carry. You can't mistake that.
I will argue that when fight or flight is going on, certain people, that's what I'm saying. There are, and she may be, and I don't know anything about her personally. Mm-hmm. She may never have been equipped to be in that situation, mentally capable of handling the emotional dump that comes with that fear. That then takes all, and you've seen it and I've seen it, where your ability to, you ask anybody who's been, there are a lot of people that you've asked have been in shooting. I'm not one of them, but when I was in my shooting, I counted the rounds as they were coming out of my chamber. I could tell, I told you exactly the pacing in which they came out. There's some people, because I have no idea how many rounds I fired. I don't even know where I shot because that dump happens so aggressively that they can't handle it. And I think for me, when I listened to her testimony and I watched that video, and I've trained in this for 30 years as a firearms expert, as a SWAT, 13 years of SWAT, 4 years as an air marshal, I can tell you that there are people that just physically cannot manage that level of dump. And I think that's what happened with her. Now, in a normal environment, if you grab both guns, you know which one's which. And even in a training environment.
I would say, Matt, though, that inability to handle that level of stress is unacceptable for the job that we have.
100%. Oh, no doubt. She should have never been on the street or there. Oh, no doubt.
So let's weigh that out. Out of the 900,000 police officers across this country, how many can't?
Oh, I would say a larger number than you think, or people may think.
Right. And that is a major issue. So it comes into training, but not only training, not only formal training, preparation. The best thing that ever happened to me getting hired at my police department were two individuals. Those two individuals, and I'll call them by name right now, the present chief of Carlisle Police Department, Taro Landis. He was a sergeant in my police department, one of my primary FTOs. Steve Dentino, who presently still holds his certification as a police officer, went from, obviously patrolman to sergeant to lieutenant of my police department. The training that they provided me while I was on FTO, explaining to me while we were driving around on midnight shifts, you've got to be able to get your gun while you're seatbelted in your car. What are you going to do if this happens? What are you going to do if you get into a gunfight while you're driving? What are you going to do when someone walks up to your car? And I don't care if it's a little old lady or not. What are you going to do? The things that they set into my mind at those times prepared me for the things that I've done. Shooting through my windshield, shooting through a moving car. When someone I don't know approaches my vehicle, they don't see it. There is a handgun drawn pointing at the door of that vehicle. They don't see me draw the handgun. I have no idea who they are. I will not become a statistic. And that is the purpose of it. The training, the ingraining. What am I going to do all day when you drive around in your police car? I think that is something that is lacking in our profession.
Oh, yeah.
I think they get in their car, they have their routine, which is horrible. The routine is horrible because it opens you up to ambush. These are things that individuals involved in tactics, like you and myself, both SWAT trained. I was SWAT trained through the military. We obviously have advanced training through the air marshals. All these different things build, like you said, putting the bricks, right? Put the bricks together. But a lot, I'm not going to say all, there's many departments that they say, hey, listen, here's your ticket book. Not even ticket book anymore. You got tracks. Here's your notepad. Here's your gun, badge, handcuffs, radio, car. Go patrol. I'll see you in 8 hours. And then when the shit falls down and they make a bad mistake, I get it. They made a mistake. I think people in our vocation need to also understand that they have to invest in themselves. You have to invest in yourself. So when it comes to training, are there courses out there for, de-escalation? Sure, they shove it down your throat now. But what about handling people that are mentally ill? What about going a transition from, they do transition from handgun to rifle and rifle to handgun, but do they have any training out there right now for transition from, I'm on deadly right now, man, this is going from deadly, nah, it's not there yet, and then reholstering and then maybe presenting your taser. I think a lot of it has to do with training. I think a lot of it has to do with mindset. And I'll coin Steve Dentino on this one, combat fighting mindset. The man that actually wrote for MOPEC, the response for an active shooter, that was Steve Dentino. They tried to pull his entire program because he said combat fighting mindset in that program. And he said, if you pull that, I'm pulling all my curriculum. And they let it go forward. Now, I'm sure it's since changed because he's not the author of it anymore. But there's aspects of this career that must be ingrained in a subject's, an officer's mind. They must train. And if you don't train, it's a dereliction of duty as far as I'm concerned.
I agree with everything you just said, 1,000,000%.
Okay.
But there is such, and I go back to what I said about law enforcement jumping shark, the focus and intention of law enforcement in the higher levels of government has shifted, and it's shifted progressively more so every year since 2002 towards the removal of everything you just talked about.
Mm-hmm.
It's become a more fluff versus stuff. We look good. We have pressed uniforms. We wear our Sam Browns. We got polished shoes. Our cars are brand new and look great. We're answering alarm calls and taking papers to people's front steps because that's what our chief may want. Not mine in particular, but
Right.
this professionalizing of a job that, quite frankly, doesn't necessarily fit in any one box. You've got to have the right people hired, and I think that's where law enforcement has shifted. It went from being a prior military, more blue collar profession to a white collar, more professionalized profession. And that, when you're drawing from people who've never been in a fist fight, who have never smoked a joint, who have never been out past the lights and street lights going out.
If they had street lights
coming on, right.
Mm-hmm.
That's where you can't teach some of the things you talked about are life skills. Things that you've accrued along the way.
I think though and I'm gonna take a little bit issue with professional in your use of the word professionalism, or being professional. I don't have an issue with that. I think we should carry ourselves professionally. I think what society thinks they want, what politicians are pushing, they're just kind of wrapping up their socialized nonsense in a different verbiage. They want robots, and the robots that they want lily wristed or lily livered, as my dad would say, robots. That it's okay, Johnny, I understand you made a mistake, just don't do it again. That's what they want, because you can see it just mirrored in society constantly. Let's keep giving these chances. Let's, complaints about, socio-economic and demographic stuff. Listen, I don't buy it. And the reason I don't buy it, and the reason I don't subscribe to it, is because I've seen men and women of all colors, races, and creeds rise above stuff that they came from. You and I, sir, could write a book, because we came from the absolute opposite of what society right now is saying is this major issue. Because you and I grew up in an area where we were the minority. We were the minority. We could have easily fallen into a lot of the things that we were surrounded by. I remember the last time we talked, you talking about, hey, listen, you were on both sides of the fence. That was your fantasy, was operating on both sides of the fence. I was thrown to the wolves. I was there. I saw it. I could have easily gone the path of many of my friends. I own this life. I own what I've done in my career. I've owned what I've done in my time as a young man. And that's why right now, when you look in the background of what you see, I own that. I don't live in Norristown anymore. I'm not, well, I still am, God rest his soul, but I'm not this kid that came from an alcoholic family, a blue collar, lower than middle class. Dad was an electrician. Mom was a secretary at a hospital. I don't live that life. I didn't give that life to my kids. When I go to parties and people ask me about where I come from and I tell them my story, they can't believe it. Because once again, I've traveled across continents.
I've been successful. And the reason I've been successful is because I made a decision that I'm not going to let this nonsense outside of here affect me. I'm going to get mine. And on top of that, I'm going to enjoy my life. So I can't, we can't have this robotic nonsense when it comes to this profession. I think that is the problem, because when people get that idea that they can be a robot, they think they have time to calculate. In this profession, this vocation, your time to calculate a decision,
Nanoseconds.
yes, in serious things, nanoseconds, and in other things where you're going to take somebody's freedoms away, a matter of 30 seconds, maybe. You know, I tell guys, I teach them in my courses, when I make a traffic stop, I can tell you within 30 to 45 seconds whether or not an individual is involved in some sort of criminal activity. It takes a lot of practice. It takes a lot of skill. It takes a lot of training. But it is the responsibility of us as police officers to do that. It's the responsibility of administrations to foster it. It's definitely not the responsibility of the police department or the administration to make robots and cookie cutter cops, because cookie cutter cops are the ones that make a lot of mistakes.
That guys like you and I have to fix or pay the penalty for.
How many times have you gone to a contact with an individual and they come off like super, like just anti-cop? I've come across so many of those folks, and I sit back and, of course, after years of interview and interrogation courses and interdiction courses and criminal interception courses, I can show empathy. I can show, hey, listen, I understand. I don't know what your experiences have been in the past, but I'm not that guy. And the more and more I repeat that to them, because I've had individuals that had it ingrained in their head so bad that cops are this, you're a white cop, this is how your response is. And I just keep telling them, listen, I don't know what you expect. I'm not that guy. You have no idea who I am. You don't know where I come from. And then when I can have a back and forth with them, you'll see that their body returns back to homeostasis. And I know it's a little technical, but I'm not a college educated cop, like as we know in the past ones. I've taught across the country. But when you bring that subject back down to homeostasis, you can have some sort of common ground. And even if I have to arrest you, at the end, the majority of the time I get, you know what, Officer Hittle, or now Corporal Hittle, you are the nicest guy, nicest cop I've ever met. And I wish I met you in different circumstances. That should be the goal of every single cop out there. And I'm not trying to say I'm the best out there, because there have been times where I lost my stuff. But it should be a goal to come to that sort of back and forth. The last thing I want to do is put hands on somebody. I mean, handcuffs, I understand that. But I mean, like going round and round. I'm too damn old for that. You know, that's why I got young guys on my squad. I'm too old for that. And I'll tell that to a suspect. I got a couple good fights left in me. I don't want to waste it on you. Let's come to some common ground here. And, you know, some guys will, oh, you bitched out. No, I accomplished the mission without getting a 1983 case, without all this other BS. I used the power of my mind, the power of my mouth. And I treated that person with the respect that every single person you deal with deserves. And I'll go back to the fraternity that you and I both belong to, and one of the foundations of it. And that is one of them. That's your fellow man right there. Deal with them with respect. You'll eliminate a lot of this nonsense. And if you stop and look at some of these videos of these traffic stops that go really bad, or contacts that go really bad, there's so many different techniques that could have been used. Yeah. And I'm not preaching on de-escalation. Absolutely not. Because I'm not about the bitchification of cops, part of my English. But I think, there's been it's a bombardment of lack of professionalism. How about that one? When we start doing these dance challenges, right? And these sing-alongs in your police car in uniform. People see that stuff on TikTok. No wonder they don't respect cops. I was one of the largest opponents when that whole trend started. And I'm like, have a little bit of respect for your badge. And then on top of that, the administrators that allow it. I don't agree with that either. I think it's a disgrace. It's a profession. I'm not a sideshow. I'm not here for your amusement. Don't get it twisted. I will do my job. But their administrations are feeding into this lack of respect for cops.
Yeah, you think that, I mean, let's be honest. Again, since 2002, law enforcement jumped the shark. The people that are currently in charge today probably got hired sometime around that period of time and have made their way up through the ranks. And that is and when I talk about professionalism, it's not necessarily a matter of doing your job with respect and honor. Right. It's more of professionalism in the scope of what the terminology is under accreditation, where professionalism is based on stats, numbers, processes, trackable items that somebody can state that you are a professional police department because you accomplish these X, Y, and Z tasks every given year, that your handcuffing techniques are 2 inches of this and 2 fingers, and that every officer did that and they checked that off the box on their report and that kind of shit. That's what I'm talking about with professionalism.
Okay, gotcha.
That's where the professionalism of law enforcement has become the focus versus the job of law enforcement. And that's when you look at the top-down leadership component, whether it's budgets for training, whether it's, there's a lot of people that I know personally that are in leadership positions in law enforcement that can't draw their gun 3 times in a row correctly and place it on target. That they have zero respect for training. They have zero respect for the fact that they carry a lethal weapon on their body and may at some point in time ask one of their officers to use it. Those are all things that when you look at the totality of law enforcement, it went from being a community-based, live where you work, know who you serve, and do it to the best of your ability as a more blue-collar mindset where you go to work every day. It's a lunch pail type job. To this, you now have to provide all of these different qualifications just to get hired. You and I could not get hired in our respective police departments if we were an 18-year-old or 21-year-old today. That's a fact.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point because I'd love to present that, maybe even to the board of supervisors or to my chief of police. If you, and I know he does, I know my chief respects me, and I know my chief understands my qualifications. I'd love to pose the question to him in a professional way and say, where would you be or at this point in time, if a 24-year-old Russ Hittle applied to this police department? You wouldn't even look at him twice. And then on top of that, you would have lost out on everything that
brought to the table over the last 24 years.
Brought to the table. Right. So, so all these federal certifications that I have and all the good that I've done for my community and all the good I've done across this country, as far as instructing is concerned, you wouldn't have that anymore. So where's the thought process in that?
It's because you go back to your cookie cutter law enforcement. They created it's essentially a law enforcement franchise. Having been in the franchise world, developed and created my own, I can tell you it's business in a box. It's meant to be replicatable. It's meant to take away all of the thought and give somebody the business in a box that allows them to be successful day one. That's what they've done with law enforcement as far as the framework around a police department. Is they created this cookie cutter, professionalized, accredited police department box and said every department has to fit into this box. And what it's done is it's limited the ability of law enforcement professionals in leadership positions to say, this guy sucks and will suck because he doesn't have what it takes to be a cop.
Mhm.
but they can't because he meets all of the boxed criteria. College educated, clean criminal background, never did drugs, never had sex with a fruit, whatever. Like all the things they go off of, and they say he fits our mold. Let's hire him. He knows how to answer questions well. He's articulate. All of those things. I'm not saying these guys are idiots. I'm just saying sometimes when the shit goes sideways, they're not going to make the right choice because they have nothing to fall back on as their knowledge base. Yeah. And if a Russ Hittle can't get hired in 2022, that's some fucked up shit for law enforcement. Like, where is the future of law enforcement if not for the guys like EJ Whiten? When we pulled up to a fight when I was in FTO with my FTO, two guys are banging the shit out of each other in the corner in Pottstown, and he goes, "Hold on, I'm ready to jump out of the car.
Let them fight it out."
He goes, "Hold on." I said, "Why?" He goes, "Let them get good and tired."
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, "Why?" He goes, "You don't want to be fighting them when they're fresh, because the minute you show up, they're going to stop fighting each other. They're going to fight you." And I'm like, that makes sense. Like shit like that. AJ was from North Carolina. He didn't have pot to piss in. He didn't have any education. You know what he had? Fucking knowledge and experience, and the ability to discern and rationalize information in such a way that kept him and others safe and did the job successfully. That's law enforcement.
Yeah, and there's so many different aspects to that. I mean, I'll judge. I'll assess. An officer. I mean, especially when I go into county court, you want to talk about a mismatch. Put a 5-year patrolman up against a person that's been working as a lawyer for 20, 30 years, and how they navigate themselves through court, and if they stumble or if they smoke that ass on a stand. And I'm not saying it because I'm that guy, although I've whooped that ass, and I've gone up against Jack McMahon in a bank robbery trial and made his head turn damn purple. Never one time did I raise my voice. Jack McMahon about had a freaking heart attack. And I've gone against plenty of high powered attorneys out of Philadelphia. And it's all about critical thinking. It's all about knowledge of the law. It's all about behavior, because an attorney will give you a tell just like a bad guy will give you a tell. And therein lies another aspect of this job that I don't think a lot of these college kids or people without any sort of street smarts or exposure to the real world can really compete. You wonder why they plea bargain in so many of these cases? Because they're afraid to get a cop on a stand. Not me. Let's take it. Let's take it to trial. It's been a while. I enjoy a good challenge.
Think about, people don't know this either, and I know for a fact they don't. I've made hundreds, thousands of arrests in my career.
Mm-hmm.
And when you make an arrest, anything above a summary, typically there's going to be somebody represented by either a public defender, or somebody they hired as a lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
And I, the Pottstown High School graduate, non-college educated, have to present my case to a district magistrate against the defendant and his $300 an hour lawyer,
mm-hmm.
who is arguing at a way higher level of knowledge of the law and case law and precedents and all those other things that go into it. And I have to hold my own to get my case to go through to the next level. So it goes to either goes to trial, whatever the case might be. I have to go against a lawyer. So not only do I have to know my job as a cop and to go through all the traumas and the chaos, but I then have to go, okay, how do I present this without, leading the witness or whatever the objections are going to be, because I don't know all the ins and outs of lawyering, but I have to be able to get it through against somebody who knows everything about lawyering. And that is a stress alone, knowing that. And then not to mention the corruptness of district courts anyways. There's certain judges. I'll give you an example. I went to one of my first drug cases when I was working in one department. Great drug case. I go to court. waiting out in the lobby, and the judge comes down. He goes, "Have you had a chance to talk to counsel?" I said, "Nah, I haven't. I don't even know who the lawyer is." He tells me who it is. "I think you should talk to him." I said, I'm a pretty solid case. It's cut and dry. I'm good."
Mm-hmm.
Go in, home run case. Judge throws everything out.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes, "Can I see you in my chambers?" I'm like, "What the fuck was that, Judge?" He goes, "Next time I tell you to speak to counsel, speak to counsel."
Yeah,
Like,
that's not ethical at all.
but I mean, that's been my, and I don't know about your judges, but I can tell you my 30 years of being a cop, I've had dozens of those situations.
I can tell you this, even as members of our fraternity, not one time have I ever been asked by a judge to do something like that.
Oh, he didn't ask me. He inferred that I should speak to somebody.
Yeah.
Right.
He implied. Yeah. No, I've never, honestly, Matt, I've never had that happen to me. And maybe it's just by the roll of the dice and whoever the magistrate was. And after this, we can probably talk about who it was off record. But no, absolutely not. And I've lost cases before on technicalities, but in that process, it's made me the cop that I am. It's made me the affiant that I am. When you can go, and this is, and it probably doesn't mean much because you're in Montgomery County, but when you can go to a case at the preliminary hearing, or if it comes time for trial, when you go to the case and you get approached by a defense attorney, by like the likes of, like, for Chester County, Joe Green or Dan Bush, and they come up to you and they're like, "What can we do? Come on, Russ." And I'm like, "You'll get nothing. He's a bad guy. He did the crime. My case is tight." And they go in court and plead open. You say $300 an hour? Try 1,000, 2,000.
We had different demographics where I'm working and you're working.
Yeah, absolutely. But these are high-priced attorneys. But what I'm saying is, when you build a reputation of going up on the stand, I remember going up on a stand for it was like it was a PennDOT hearing. And I just got done working midnight shift. And Dan Bush walks in, is representing this guy. And he looks at me and smiles. And Dan's a hell of a defense attorney. I consider him a friend. And Dan comes over to me. He goes, "Are you ready?" And I go, "Dan, I just worked the midnight shift. If you piss me off, we're going to have a problem." And he kind of laughed, and I went up on a stand. He literally asked me 2 questions. And he said, "I have no more for this witness." And of course, the guy was found in violation, and that was it. But it's like a kind of a mutual respect. Joe Green came at me really hard the first time I ever sat, in the witness stand. And after that, everything was cool. Me and him never had a problem again.
It's different world in Montgomery County, brother. It's a whole different ballgame. Everything is lawyer judge relationship based. You're just along for the ride. Yeah, you're just.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not exposed to that. I'm sorry that has been your experience.
Oh, that's my career. That's every judge I've ever been in front of is pretty much, current one, not so much, but all the other ones before have all been, you know who the attorneys are who have favor, and those are the ones you deal with the most, and because they're the ones that are getting the most cases in there, and you're going to have to make some deals. And I can't remember the last time ever prior, now granted, I'm not nearly as aggressive as I used to be, but I didn't have to make a deal just to get it through. And that's part of law enforcement too. And that's when, we're about to wrap this up. And I think what I want people to understand is that being a cop with 18 months of experience, no requirement necessarily to have any law experience or, nowadays they want you to have a college degree on some level, at least an associate's. But when I was growing up, most of the guys that got hired didn't have college. Because if you're spending money to go to college, you're going to get a job that paid exceptionally more money than what you get paid as a cop. And I think, I'm hoping that through our just very open conversation and different perspectives, that people recognize that there's one unifying component to this, is that our job is hard. And it is oftentimes emotionally draining, emotionally scarring. And the ripple effect of those traumas over the course of a career impact other people in ways that, people may not understand or recognize. And
I would make, if I could,
Yep.
I would like to make one suggestion, because I have a feeling this is definitely going to be, we're going to end up doing another one of these.
Yep.
If we do another one of these, I would hope and suggest maybe we could do a little something on post-traumatic stress.
Yeah.
Involving law enforcement. So we've talked about the chaos and we've touched on the trauma. Let's the next time we do this, let's talk about the aftermath, the real aftermath of
Great
what
idea.
happens.
Great
And
idea.
maybe that'll help open some eyes also, not only to the public, but then also to the cops that listen to this. Because like I said, I'm going to spread this on my company's social media, and then we work in concert with another company out in Texas. And I think it could be of great importance and eye-opening to everyone involved.
Yeah, I think I agree. And I think that's a great idea. For me, you're someone I trust. So having these conversations is a lot easier with you because I know you and I know where you come from and I know what your background is and I know what your faith level is and who you are as a man. So it's a little bit easier for me to have these conversations. But we live in a world now where we're under a microscope.
Yes.
And I have to be very strategic in a lot of the things I do anymore, as I'm sure you do as well. And I want people to understand that aren't cops, that may listen to this show, that when you call 911 or you get pulled over for a speeding infraction or whatever, or you're in an accident or the alarm goes off in your house or your business, that the person coming out, you're getting in a singular moment in time that you need them for. And you don't get to choose that person. So having the ability to temper your expectations, knowing that not every police officer is at the same place at the same point in time and their knowledge, experience, and understanding of how to solve problems. And that if you understand, if you see the guy showing up at your doors, looks like he's wet behind the ears, he probably is. He probably doesn't have a shit ton of experience, but I guarantee he's going to give you his best, whatever that is. And it's not always going to be to your level of expectation. But in 10 years from now, that guy's expectation level is going to be higher on him. Yeah. Because he's going to have years of experience. He's going to have the ability to understand things a little bit better and work through situations with a little bit more knowledge and understanding of the grand scheme of things. And I think it takes time. I don't know how you replace experience. I don't know how, outside of hiring people that have lived through something. They start off with a leg up because they've been through some shit.
Like combat vets.
What's that?
I said like combat vets.
Yeah, you got to get somebody, and then, but they have to have the emotional stability to be able to.
Yes, absolutely.
But I think there is a way to do that. And I've talked to our senators. I talked to one of our senators who no longer is in office, U.S. Senator, and I said, how much does the United States government spend on treating PTSD? It's in the billions. Mm-hmm. I said, how much does the United States government spend on profiling the right people to hire to be soldiers or Marines? Almost nothing. Mm-hmm. They're in a break them and fix them business.
Yeah.
And I think we need to be in a more proactive, hire the right people for the right job. I'd rather have 10 less cops, but have the very best cops all hired than have sheer numbers in order to meet a quota. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Like I would rather have 10 swinging, gunslinging, problem solving, badass motherfuckers than 20 whatevers who just happen to be available.
Listen,
And
I agree.
I think we can change a lot of things in this world if we spend more time being proactive in the process of selecting the right people to do certain professions than trying to fix it after it's broken. And I feel like that's kind of where we are as a country, is we've allowed our country to be run by people who are not morally, ethically, or physically equipped to do the job they're being tasked with. And I think it's made its way down into the community level. And I think that's where, if we're gonna look at how do we fix some of these problems, if we're gonna look at how do we make law enforcement better, how do we make cops more respected, let's start by hiring the right people to do the job, and then thanking the ones that have stayed for 30 years, helping to teach the young ones along the way so that when they show up after 10 years, they may not be acting at the same way that they did when they showed up on their day one. Because a lot of times there's guys I know that have 15 years on a job that are still acting like they just started. Mm-hmm. And that's not a good sign for our profession. And I think as long as there's guys like you still out there every day with your dark horse business, training officers on how to do, interdictions and understand behavioral tendencies and understand how to do the job of uncovering the thing that's supposed to stay covered, like drug smuggling and human trafficking. I think you're at least you're actually doing a greater service than you probably recognize, because there are lives that are daily being saved because of teachings that you've put out there over the last 10 years or so. But it's important that there are more Russ Hittles out there working hard to turn what currently is a black-eyed profession into a profession of character and reverence once again. So thank you.
Oh, I appreciate that, man.
Guys, hang tight, Russ. We'll talk off the air. I just wanted this was a different kind of podcast, a little more raw, a little bit more edgy, a little bit more honest. A lot of times I'm having people on and I'm just helping them share their story. I may not necessarily always agree with whatever they're talking about, but I'm a vessel to help them. But this was personal for me. This is one I wanted to do with Russ and have a little bit more of a vocal input into the show. So thank you for listening. Thank you for spending time with Russ and I. I hope it shed a little light into the mind and the world of law enforcement and gave a little bit more of a respect and understanding of what we go through on a daily basis. This isn't a pity party. This is just simply an awareness hour. And I want you to understand that, it's a tough job and we're not perfect, and we do our best to do the job to the best of your expectations. So thank you again. Remember, if you want to go learn more about me, go to mattcubbler.com. You want to learn more about my book, A Brother's Love and Memoir, you can find it there or anywhere books are sold. Russ, what's your website?
darkhorsetraining.us for all our courses on our course catalog. Also for the law enforcement officers that are checking out the podcast, you can go on to Facebook and look up Dark Horse Interdiction Training Group. You'll have some questions to answer to be vetted by my moderators, and then you'll be brought into a portion and parts of the realm of criminal interdiction and criminal interception. Not only that what we teach, but then also open you up to other groups that we associate with and provide training across the nation.
Perfect. Everybody should do that. The training's amazing. I know a couple of guys that he has as instructors. One was one of my Army buddies, Marty Penny, who at some point in time we will get him on here as well. We may need an interpreter because he's from the deep woods of Tennessee, but we'll see about getting him on. But everybody, please have some compassion for your law enforcement experts in your communities. Please thank them for the job that they do and the sacrifices that they make. And I think that will help. That support will go a long way in helping officers feel as if maybe they're not simply just a tool that's used and thrown away whenever it's needed. So thank you, everybody. God bless. Go out kind to be one another. Did I say that right? Go out and be kind to one another, not be kind to another. Anyways, you know what I meant. Love you guys. See ya.